Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the LGBT Network's Town Hall series. Today is a very special town hall because of our guest. Our guest not only in his leadership and what he's done, but also because he's a very special good friend as well. And so today we're going to talk about, our guest is New York State Comptroller Tom DiNapoli. And today we're going to talk about COVID-19 and the state of the New York economy, and just have a discussion about what's happening since all this started in mid-March, so looking back, but also looking forward. So as you're watching our town hall today, you could find us live on our LGBT Network Facebook page, our YouTube, our LinkedIn, and our Twitter pages. Please consider hosting a watch party if you are on Facebook so more people could hear from Tom DiNapoli. And on each of the platforms, post your questions and we'll try to get to as many as possible. So today we are fortunate to have one of the most liked persons in New York State politics, or maybe in the nation. He's honest and earnest. He's our New York State Comptroller, and is not just most liked, he's even more importantly most trusted. And that is so important for the office of the New York State Comptroller, or for any really public office. Tom is a lifelong Long Islander, born and raised, and the only New York statewide official from Long Island. Tom has been in the public elected office since the age of 18 when he was elected to the Great Neck School Board, making him the youngest person at that time elected in New York State history. Right now he's only 25, so it's only been 7 years. But Tom has been our New York State Comptroller since 2007. And in that role, he has protected taxpayers by identifying and recovering billions in waste, fraud, and abuse in government, brought historic transparency to the New York State government with Open Book New York. There's many accomplishments, so please hold on here. He's uncovered corruption in state and local governments, leading to dozens of arrests and tens of millions of restitution of taxpayer funds. He manages the third largest public pension pension in the nation, investing $2 billion in private equity and loan programs to benefit New York-based businesses and provide a return to the state pension fund, which is obviously at this time having some difficulty as every state is in our nation. But we know that we're lucky to have Tom at the helm right now. He holds companies accountable by bringing his own brand of corporate consciousness as the leading shareholder voices on many corporate concerns, including environmental issues, disability inclusion, corporate political spending. And I remember very well holding Mobil Exxon to the fire when they were discriminating against LGBT folks. He has fought hard for not-for-profits, doing the work in New York State to minimize the wait for being paid on contracts. He has recovered and returned more than $430 million to people through his unclaimed funds program. And on a more personal note, for both the LGBT network and LGBT New Yorkers, Tom has been a friend and a leader to everyone long before it was popular. Tom has always taken a leadership stance and been on the right side of fighting for full equality and justice for LGBT New Yorkers. In fact, when Tom was in the New York State Assembly, he was the first elected leader to deliver vital funding to the LGBT network, which enabled us to open up our first LGBT center in Bayshore, our first community center in Bayshore, which by early next year will be home to 75 units of LGBT and LGBT-friendly affordable housing and a new community center as well. So it's really because of Tom that we were able to open up that center and now have the land to be able to make sure that our seniors could stay on Long Island and have an affordable place to live. Since then, he has been an unwavering advocate for us in our community. He was awarded the prestigious LGBT Network Lifetime Achievement Award in 2019. And I really can't say enough good stuff about Tom, not only in his work, but just who he is as a New Yorker, who he is as a human being, who he is as a friend. There really is no one better than Tom DiNapoli. So welcome my good friend, the conscience of New York State government, Tom DiNapoli.
David, thank you very much. That was a most generous introduction, and I'm humbled by it. And given how crazy things are these days, it's very positive and affirming to hear those words. Last last year's gala when you honored me with that Lifetime Achievement Award. It really was, a very special moment. It was a wonderful honor, and your words and meant so much. And I must tell you, although obviously I knew I was getting the award, we had talked about it for a while, the evening was very special with how you put it together. And, really, I felt the praise was not fully warranted, just as your introduction. Although I do have to correct one minor point on your introduction. As you know, I'm a longtime resident of Great Neck, but my election at age 18 was to the Mineola Board of Education. So I don't want to have my, Mineola friends think that I'm forgetting my roots. But, you and I got to know each other when I was in the state assembly, and I had the great privilege to represent the 16th district in Nassau County for 20 years. And I remember, I had certainly heard about you by reputation. Our mutual friend, my former colleague, Audrey Pfeffer, knew you from the Rockaways. And little did I know that that first meeting would really end up being.
Sorry about that.
Sounds like.
Sorry. All right.
We had tornado warnings here.
I think let me turn myself on mute. The joys of live being live.
What I was saying, little did I know that first meeting would result in what is becoming, I feel like, a lifelong friendship. And I just want to say, David, I really learned a lot from you. I mean, I think that besides informing me as an elected official on all the various issues that are key to the LGBTQ community, how it intersects, legislatively, just in terms of you being a role model and someone who's taught the rest of us how, in fact, anybody can make a difference. When I think about, how you started out with Legally, it was the first iteration of the network, how you built this organization up, how you took on big issues. I mean, we take for granted, and young people take for granted today, marriage equality, but you were really one of the pioneers to fight for that, to organize for it. The Pride Parade on Long Island, which was not an easy beginning when you started, I guess, out in Huntington. I mean, you just go down a long list. And I really commend you for, being the person who's looked to, not just on Long Island, but really in the New York metro area, as a key leader. And legislators value your opinion. Elected officials at the local level, the state level, really count on you to give us direction. And the victories have continued to come. Progress in New York on gender, banning conversion therapy. Again, these are issues that your advocacy has made a difference. And in terms of services, I mean, the beautiful center that you have on Long Island and the satellite centers you have across the island and in the boroughs as well. What's happening in Bayshore. I mean, you just go down a long list. Incredible achievements, advocacy, direct services, bringing people together, informing and educating the larger community. So it really is a privilege to work with you, certainly to call you friend, but really to benefit from the transformative way that you have provided leadership for all of us. So, and these town halls, I know this is not the first one. You've been very effective in communicating, with everyone who's connected to the center, utilizing the modern technology. And, thank you for inviting me to be part of the discussion today.
Well, thank you, Tom. That was it was very nice, very meaningful. We know each other for
100 years.
Yes. long time. But and thanks for clarifying that it was the Mineola School Board, which makes that. I'm going to put myself on mute for 1 second.
If that's Razy calling you, you can take it though, Dave.
So I'm glad that you clarified that it was the Mineola School Board, because that makes even the victory, even greater, because Mineola is a little more conservative of a community than Great Neck. So to see you elected as a teenager, standing up for student rights and making sure that our education system delivers all that it can is just quite impressive. So so thank you once again. So it's been a crazy time. I mean, we caught up a little bit a couple of weeks ago, and a little bit before this broadcast about that it's been, 5 months, but it seems like eons ago that, that this all started back in March, in New York, mid-March. So maybe if you could just give us an update as to how you're doing, but also how the office, what's happening in your view and your thoughts about the state of our nation, the state of New York, the state of New York economy. I mean, there's so much there to talk about. So I leave it to you to start wherever you want.
Well, I mean, the state of our nation is just so depressing at many levels. The political discourse has really been very troubling to me in terms of what we continue to hear from the White House. I mean, it's even hard to go into it because it'll be an unpleasant conversation. I think we all understand that the election in November can't come soon enough, from my point of view. And I think everything we're going through with the health crisis, with the pandemic, with the economic crisis, all of it is made so much worse because of the problem with national leadership. I'll leave it at that. I mean, if you want to talk more about that, we can, but I'll get back to the national stuff in terms of some of what we need, from New York State. For me personally, I'm fine. Thankfully, my family's been fine. I've had 2 COVID tests so far, both of them negative. So that's the good news for me. And work-wise, as I mentioned to you, I've been working out of Albany most of the work days since this all started. We have our main offices here in Albany, and then we have a pretty big office in New York City, and then we have satellite offices all across New York State, including at Hauppauge on Long Island. But outside of Albany, really all of our offices have been closed. Some folks, if they've got to go in for a one-off purpose, they can go in. But for all intents and purposes, most of our staff of 2,800 people are working remotely. Even here in our main office in Albany, we have on a given workday, right, pre-pandemic, 1,800 people in this building. If we have on a given day now 100 people in the building, that's a lot. So fortunately, because we're pretty tech savvy, many of our folks had laptops already. We had a pretty liberal telecommuting policy already. So fortunately, our various responsibilities have been carried out and functioning pretty well. And for me, it's just been easier for me to work, from here rather than from home. And I kind of like still having some social interactions with people as well. In terms of our work, which very much focuses on looking at the numbers and the trend in the state budget, we've been having to report on a lot of, negative news. I think everyone's first concern appropriately is what's happening with the pandemic from a health perspective. I think appropriately, Governor Cuomo has gotten very good marks for how New York, which was hit, first and hit very hard, and there was a lot of learning as we went along, but certainly you look at where New York stands now in terms of the numbers versus so many other states and states that did not do a phased in, thoughtful reopening as we've done in New York, you see their numbers spiking. Whereas in New York, we've been able to hold our numbers down, very well. And I think that continues to be, the first priority for government. And that is to make sure that we're using the best science, the best knowledge, and that we're keeping people safe. New York had a very high death rate. I mean, that's obviously a legacy of what happened in the beginning, but fortunately the numbers are, the curve has been flattened, the numbers continue to trend downward, and that's very good news. But the concern is what happens in the fall. Will there be a reinfection? And that's why, again, from a national perspective, until they develop a vaccine and more effective therapeutics, we're all going to have to be very, very careful. So, using the masks, doing the social distancing, all of that is very important. And for us as a workplace, I'm sure it's what, I know it's what you're going through as well. We've been talking about it. We're not rushing to have people come back to work. We're very mindful of people being concerned about their own safety, very mindful of issues related to schools and childcare and elder care. So we have a long way to go before, we're through all this. And in the short run, and I'll just touch on it briefly, if you want to go into more detail, I'd be happy to, because we had to put, our lives on hold and the economy on hold, for New York State, we've had very significant economic damage in terms of people being laid off, small businesses closing, tax revenue way down at the local level, at the state level. And again, we can go into more detail if you'd like, but suffice it to say, we're looking at a significant budget shortfall at the state level, which if that translates into budget cuts, it's going to mean cuts not only to state agencies, but in local assistance, which is aid to school districts, to counties, to towns, to villages, to cities. It'll have an impact on nonprofits. So the mantra that the governor has had out there, and I certainly have been echoing it, is that we really need more help from Washington, not only to reimburse for expenses related to the COVID-19 response, and we've gotten some money to deal with that already, and we're thankful for that. But we really need money to repair the economic damage, because when the economy is on hold, you don't have the economic activity, the tax revenue is not being generated, government doesn't have the money to do what it needs to do. So we've done more borrowing than usual to get through this difficult time. There's already been a slowdown in payments and reimbursements to local governments and nonprofits, but this really could translate into permanent cuts to the tune of over $8 billion in local assistance cuts, $1.6 billion in state agency cuts. That really could be harmful to because if the state has to do that, it transfers our shortfall to the local level. And so by local level, I mean local governments, and I mean the nonprofit sector. And if we're looking to continue to battle the health crisis, keep people safe and healthy, and respond to COVID-19, and if we're looking to restart the economy, who are on the front line of providing services that are key to healthcare and key to providing support for our economy? It's local government and it's nonprofits. So unless we can fill the hole that we have because of the loss of revenue with direct support from Washington, who clearly has more revenue sources than we have, and they can print money. We can't do that in the state. We're really going to be in a tough situation. So this debate that's going on, as you know, this week, it's been going on for too many weeks, as to what should be the next version of the federal stimulus. What is key is that piece of the House bill that the Senate thus far has not embraced, and that is direct, unrestricted aid to states, to local governments to repair the loss in revenue so that we don't transfer that in a way that hurts people at the local level. And that's really what we've been focused on and lending voice to that concern. So, let me end it there. I could go on and on about it, but I touched on some pieces of what you laid out there, but I'd be happy to go in more specifics on any of that if you'd like me to.
Sure. Thank you. I mean, these are issues I think that if you follow in the news or if you're experiencing it, right? I mean, most New Yorkers, most Americans are living this right now, but in particular, New Yorkers who were hit so hard with the pandemic early on. And as you said, because of how New York approached handling the pandemic, that New York now has one of the lowest rates or the lowest rate in the nation of coronavirus. But because of the immense costs that happened, it's sort of a trickle-down effect now that is going to affect every aspect of our lives as New Yorkers, in our own local communities, in our governments, of course, in different services. I believe that that we're accustomed to having, and then, as you mentioned, to nonprofits. I mean, who have always been on the front lines, fighting for the health, equity, and safety of our community members. And for us at the LGBT network, issues that existed pre-pandemic haven't gone away. In fact, they've only increased. The number of hate crimes reported to our organization have more than doubled in the last couple of months. The number of kids who are homeless, who are runaway homeless, also has increased. Bullying hasn't stopped. In fact, now we're dealing with much larger issues of cyberbullying. But I think, like you said, what happens in Washington is sort of that domino effect, where they kind of tip that first domino, and then it's real difficult until there is some aid to localities. Uh, Funding, I guess, that is provided, and that's equitable to New York too. I mean, and maybe if you could speak on that a little bit about how New York, how New York really gives more than it gets back, and what should New York be getting right now?
Yeah, all important points, and I'm glad. Well, I'm not glad that you have an increase in requests for services on hate crimes and bullying and so on. But you touch on an important point that I didn't mention. We're dealing with a public health emergency. We're dealing with an economic crisis, and the social unrest and the social dislocation, all accentuated by what happened with the George Floyd murder and what that's unleashed. It's just an incredible mix of challenges. But to your point about the help from Washington, and again, I think we have to recognize that in the first iterations, it's more than one of the bills that they passed in Washington, and I give credit to our members of Congress, both sides of the aisle, and our two senators, and Chuck Schumer's in a key role, obviously, as the Senate Minority Leader. They have come up with some help for hospitals, help for testing, help for small businesses. It wasn't perfect, but they got some of the bugs out of that, but they understood they need to help small businesses and some money for states. I mean, New York State, just on COVID related reimbursement got $5 billion, another $1 billion for schools, another $900 million for higher ed, increased reimbursement for FEMA costs, federal emergency, Medicaid reimbursement increase. Some of our localities qualified. If you were a locality of 500,000 people or more, you were able to qualify for some of this reimbursement. So Nassau, Suffolk, Town of Hempstead, New York City were part of the handful of localities that received some of that. The problem is, the need has been enormous. So what has been sent so far hasn't been adequate to cover the costs. And then for us downstate, the MTA, the Long Island Railroad, the subways, they've gotten some money, but we see the gaping hole and how important for our economy it will be to get the Long Island Railroad and the subways and the MTA back functioning. So that's where it really comes back to the discussion of what else can we get from Washington. So, and I just want to emphasize, and I'll talk about the balance of payments that you touched on, but it's not a New York State only issue. Now that the other states are being hit hard, their expenses are going up. Their economies are, even the ones that reopened, they're having to go back now and close in some cases. Kentucky, home state of Mitch McConnell, last week their budget office put out an alert. I think their shortfall was $1 billion. It's a much smaller state, so it's real money. Every state is in need of this kind of help and support. So the $500 million that the National Governors Association asked for, and that's a bipartisan organization, and 500 billion. Did I say million or billion? Billion is what I meant to say if I said million. That's an important request, and that's included in the HEROES Act that the House passed. And they also have another $375 billion that would go to localities, to Nassau, Suffolk, to New York City, and so on. So those are very important pieces of the House bill, and for New York, the case is compelling because, as you say, we got hit hard and got hit early, but we also are a donor state. And what do we mean by that? A number of years ago, some of you on this town hall may remember Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, a very legendary senator that represented New York. And he instituted a balance of payments report that he would do pretty much every year. And we, in the Comptroller's office here, we reactivated that approach. We call it our federal fiscal report. We don't do it every year, but we've done it, I guess, about 4 times now. And what it shows is that we keep sending more money to Washington in terms of our tax dollars than we get back. So just to give you some sense of numbers, for every dollar that New York sends to Washington, we get back now about 90 cents. The average for every dollar that a state sends to Washington is they get back $1.21.
Wow.
So we're one of less than 10 states. I think we're one of 7 states now that are a net giver. And we're at the bottom of the list in terms of the gap between what we send and what we get back. So every state needs help, and New York particularly needs help. And New York has been particularly generous in helping to support the federal government. So, that's why in New York, our congressional delegation, it really has been bipartisan, have been making the case we need the help for state and local governments.
So what can, what do you think New Yorkers can do to, we have our congressional delegation behind this. Obviously, we have our 2 senators that are fighting for this. What else can New Yorkers do to advocate for this?
Well, I mean, like I said, the good news is I think our folks get it, but, what I've been trying to do is lend a louder voice. So we've had op-eds printed in the various publications. We're writing to legislators outside of New York. So that might be something, some of your members of the network and those who are listening in could do. Maybe something as simple as sending a letter to Mitch McConnell. I mean, he seems to be the holdup at this point. And this week is key. I don't know much more than what I read in the press. There seems to be some effort to try to get an agreement by the end of this week. So maybe after this virtual town hall, if some of your folks could do an email or do a phone call, or do a quick turnaround on a letter to Senator McConnell saying that, New York has an issue, but it's not just a New York problem. His own state of Kentucky certainly would benefit from the federal government providing more support to state and local governments. I think something like that, would be helpful.
Mm-hmm. So thank you. So on all of our, for all of those that are watching now and may watch us later on, and it's rebroadcast, we're going to post that email that you could send that letter to Senator McConnell, and do so in large numbers. And I think also, as New Yorkers, we have relatives in other states too. Yes. And that we could contact relatives, friends, if we're part of businesses that have offices in other states, that we do reach out and ask for the help. New York has always been there to help others during times of crisis. And while New York got hit very hard, along with many others on the Northeast yesterday with the tropical storm, traditionally it's the southern states as Florida, Texas, that usually get most of the federal aid during these storms. And New Yorkers don't think twice about giving and contributing. And New York needs the help now, as we're hearing.
And I think you raise a good point, because especially when you talk about Florida, Florida, Texas, the Carolinas, those are all states that have Republican senators, and really it's the Republican Senate that's the issue. So if you've got friends and family in those other states that are voters in those states, it would certainly be helpful, for them to reach out to their Republican senators and make the point that it is in the national interest to do this. It is not a blue state issue. It's not a red state issue. It's a national issue. Because what I said before about the front line of responding to the health crisis and getting the economy moving again, it's going to be true nationally. I mean, all of the states need to be functioning if we're going to get through this and get on the other side and get things moving. My concern as controller, when I look at the out year numbers, I mean, we talk about the current year budget gap of $13 billion, but the problem is you could tell that some of what we're experiencing, we're going to experience next year and the year after as well, unless there's a really dramatic turnaround, which there probably won't be. So you're talking about a multi-year stress on state government budgets. On Long Island, I mean, before all this happened, Nassau and Suffolk, had big fiscal issues, despite, the very important efforts of, Laura Kern and Steve Ballone, they still had, many challenges. And then this comes along and, the sales tax revenue was, way off on the island, like it's been, all across the state. Last quarter, we were down statewide 27%. I think Long Island was down like 24%. People don't realize for Nassau and Suffolk, the sales tax is actually a bigger revenue source than the property tax. So again, all of this is connected. What's happening in the local government, what's happening in the school district, what's happening at the state government, what's happening with regional authorities like the MTA, and you just multiply that through all the different states. If all of these entities are going to be basically operating with deficits that aren't sustainable, how do we get basic services going? How do we get the economy going again? It's not going to work. So it's really in the national interest for us to work on the repair of the damage that's come from COVID-19, understanding that it's more than just the health concern. That's the priority, but the economic damage and the governmental damage is severe and needs a national response.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's very, very interesting. Something I didn't know before you said it was that sales tax in both Nassau and Suffolk County makes up more than property taxes. I'm sure as, all the folks from Long Island who are watching right now would say, oh my God, my taxes are always so high, and would think that, most of that money goes to that. Although we do know, I think that most of it goes to our schools.
Right.
But do you think, like we're in this time of crisis right now, and we know that Long Island has so many levels, duplicative levels. Well, some people would say duplicative levels of government, or we have 127 superintendents. We have, there's just layer on top of layer on top of layer. And it's, do you think, perhaps that in this time of crisis is a good opportunity to take a look at some structural change that may be needed? Because as you said, we're going to be in this for years, right? Yep. So now a time to take a look at maybe some changes hard changes that may need to be made.
Yeah. Well, it's always a good opportunity to do that, but my experience over many years of being involved with this is that whenever you take a hard look, most people run the other way. So, it's always interesting. People think there are too many layers of government until you tell them you're going to take away, their school, merge their school district or abolish their village, and by and large people. So wait a minute, that's not what I had in mind. So my thought is, it always has been, because look, I think your point is absolutely valid. And if we were creating government in New York, and certainly government on Long Island today, we would not have it set up the way it's set up. Just you appropriately mentioned school district funding, and school districts are largely funded by property taxes and state aid, federal aid to a lesser extent. And in very, very limited situations in New York State, there are some counties that share some of the sales tax with school districts, but that's a minuscule amount. So we have this very important service that's very expensive, where we have a big investment in it on a very regressive level of taxation, and that causes the concern. People who run for county office often end up having to explain, and it still doesn't sink in a lot of people, that people complain about the taxes in Nassau County as an example. Well, you're right, it's mostly the school tax, right? So the whole system of taxation is probably one that we should have rethought a long time ago. And then we have all these districts, and they're of so many different sizes, right? But each of them, as you point out, has a superintendent and several assistants, and the administrative network on top of that. So the ability to right size, if I could call it that, school districts, while it would make sense from an objective point of view, how you would begin to do that, I don't know. Because again, people will argue, well, I moved here because of this school district. I remember when I was in the assembly once, I had some irate parents call because their elementary school was being rezoned. It was within the Great Neck School District, which is a pretty good school district by most standards. And people were outraged. I moved to go to this elementary school. And I had to say, you're in the Great Neck School District. It's kind of whatever elementary school you go to, it's going to be really good, but people were like outraged. Well, elevate that to saying, you're going to merge a school district or regionalize school districts. People will probably say, if it means I got to pay a little more, I'd rather do it. And I think we have to be honest about another piece. And I'll put it on the table. It's a sensitive topic, but we have to recognize that Long Island is also a very highly segregated community in terms of housing patterns.
Mm-hmm.
And I really think that part of why that issue of consolidation never really goes too far is when you start looking at the map and you look at which school districts might be consolidated, people are like, well, wait a minute, that's not what I want. So for those reasons, David, and I know we've been talking a lot about schools, but I think that's important because of the cost. It's a high cost area, a very worthy investment. I'm a public school graduate, so I believe strongly in the public schools. What I think we should be doing, and maybe this is a time where we can do it more thoughtfully, is really look at how, without getting into that issue of outright consolidating or merging school districts and changing boundaries, talk about how we can consolidate certain services. So you mentioned, every district has their own superintendent, and I'm not knocking the superintendents; they do an important job. They get very high compensation, especially on Long Island,
Mm-hmm.
400,000 in some cases. Certainly from my perspective, to regionalize administrative services, whether that's superintendents or even the next layer of assistants, I think you could do something like that. It may not save a ton of money, but I think the symbolism of it would be important to people. It would save some money. We have always encouraged from the Comptroller's office, and I've tried to encourage this in a positive way, the sharing of back office services, IT function, business functions. Some communities have done that effectively, not enough have embraced it. And you also could do some of that back office sharing, not just, like school district to school district. You could do, between a village and a town, between the county and maybe a school district. You need to be creative about it, but you can do it. More joint bidding on supplies, on fuel, on insurance. Again, some of that has been going on already. I think we can do a lot more of it. And at the state level, there are some programs through the Department of State that provide some grant money to study the feasibility of shared services. Those kinds of initiatives that encourage communities to examine this and to see the cost savings and then to voluntarily move in this direction, to me, that would be smarter for us to really do more to incentivize, do more the carrot, rather than the stick of saying, the state's going to come in and redraw your, the lines of your village or your school district. Because I just don't think in a state like New York that has a long history of local control, I just don't think that would ever work. But, look, households are having to tighten their belts in big ways. You look at small businesses, how many of them have closed up because of the pandemic? David, the question we all have is how many of them are going to be able to reopen?
Right.
And the reality is some of them are not going to reopen. You even see, some of the restaurants are obvious. Some of them have started to reopen in our community and they've closed up again. And I've seen some, signs in my community, restaurants that have been there a long time. And there's a for lease sign now in the window. So this is going to be a time of restructuring at many levels in the private sector. And I think to your point, the public sector has to look inward and ask some tough questions about that as well.
Yeah, no, thank you for that, because I think that, some of what you laid out, I think is starting somewhere, right? And while the cost savings may not be as much if you did regionalize administrative services in each county, for our public education, that's a start, right? And it's a start of taking a look at being a little bit more fiscally accountable and prudent, if you will. But like you said, there are other issues that get in the way and other barriers, the systemic racism, the way that Long Island was built, that is all coming to a boil right now, or coming to a head. And so, there may be some sliver of opportunity if all different, whether community members, elected officials, public, other public servants all came together to kind of talk about, well, what can we do to take a look at this, because people are hurting, and people are going to be hurting moving on. It's not just these 5 months or 12 months or however long it is until we have a vaccine. We do need to take a look at it. The nonprofit sector I think also needs to take a hard look at itself. And I never was a proponent of, really taking a look at huge, merging between different organizations, because, each organization has its mission, and so there needs to be mission alignment. But I think the way that and I've been talking with some of my colleagues in saying that, this is a time where we need to be innovative, and take a look at this, not necessarily for survival of our own agencies, right? But it's what the agencies do, which is about health, which is about education, which is about saving lives, which is about public health, in addition to that. So the nonprofit sector also, needs to take a look at ourselves in how we can, perhaps work better together, or maybe, where there's duplicative efforts of nonprofits, maybe, folks do come together. I think
successful models in that regard on the island over the years. It's not like it hasn't tried, and it's worked well. But I don't think, to your point, there's really been a comprehensive, or broader discussion of that. And you're right. I mean, I think the nonprofit sector has to look just as business is looking and just as government is looking. And again, to your point, it's the service and the mission, and in some cases, might actually work even more effectively to regionalize some of that.
Yeah, no, it really would. And I think, some of the work that you've done as controller around prompt contract payment, has been very important. And in the best of times, the state is hardly prompt.
You're in the last report we put out, which was based on last year, so it's not even dealing with 2020 and everything that's happened with the pandemic as a backdrop. The state was going backward. We were actually starting to, we had improvements, and then we were starting to go back in the wrong direction on prompt contracting. And as you know, you've experienced it, without a prompt contract, you don't get a prompt payment.
Right.
And you don't get a prompt payment, then you have to dip into credit. You have all kinds of issues. It's been a problem for a long time in New York, unfortunately. And even though, there's a requirement in certain cases that if the contract is late, the agency has to pay interest, many of the agencies don't even follow the law. They don't pay interest. So, that's been a big issue. And I really fear that when we do our report on that for 2020, when we release that next year, it's going to show it much worse.
Oh, it definitely, I would imagine it's going to as well, because, I mean, we certainly have experienced it pre and post pandemic. It's not during, we're not even post pandemic yet, but, during the pandemic, that there has been very little to no state payments since the end of March. Not only for us, but for, a lot of our colleagues. In fact, we were one of 900 nonprofits that signed a letter to the governor's office to say, hey, you know what, many nonprofits are going to go under at this point. Yes, did some get the paycheck protection loan? Yes. There's also an issue with nonprofits being treated differently with respect to state funding and PPL, that some people see it as duplicative, I guess, that if you got the PPL, then you shouldn't be filing for payments from your state contracts. If you get one, they see it as the same, and that wasn't the intent of the Paycheck Protection Loan Program. It was to keep people on staff, and so it is a bank loan, right? So restaurants don't have to give money back if the consumers are coming to purchase dinner, breakfast, lunch, whatever it may be. Why should nonprofits have to give money back to? So there's a lot of issues that I think are only beginning to come to the surface. And it's going to take that innovation that you talked about and some hard choices to move forward, so that when we talk about quality of life, that New Yorkers continue to have a high quality of life as we did pre-pandemic, while addressing all the issues that we still need to continue to address, of course.
Well, I want you to know what we've been trying to do on our end, because we're the back end of all of it.
Yes.
We do the payments, but we don't process. We don't let the contracts out. Each agency does the contract, and we can't do the payment until we get the voucher, the request from the agency. But we have been, anytime we know that there's a payment that's in our system, or a contract that we have to do a final review of, we really have been expediting that for the nonprofits because, as you pointed out, what's happening now is that, again, because of the state budget shortfall, the state agency that's letting the contract, or the division of budget, which is the step before we get all this for final processing, they're delaying that information coming to our office, or they're holding back a certain percentage of what could have been paid out. So, until everything's connected, it gets back to that issue of the federal aid from Washington. You're going to see more delay of contracts, more delay of payments, more withholding of a certain percentage of a payment, whether that's to a local government, to a private business that's a contractor, or to a nonprofit, until we resolve, what's happening with the state budget. And the hope is that we get that additional help from Washington so that we can move this all much more quickly. If we don't get the additional help from Washington, what are now delayed payments, delayed contracts, holding back a percentage of the payment, will instead translate into a cut. So I know, some of the nonprofits are concerned, that they can't get their payment on time. But, part of what I've had to say back is, that may be true, but at least at this point, they haven't canceled your contract, or they haven't said you're not ever going to get your payment. And the other piece of the argument, I mentioned earlier, we're doing more borrowing to get through this, and what's being done as far as holding back on processing some of the payments. But if the cuts would come down, the other piece that some people are advocating for are increased taxes. The different iterations of certain fees, some people, or certain ways to increase certain fees that already exist, or taxes. The most common, you hear people say we should tax the wealthy even more. There's not an easy political answer to that, because not everybody has the same opinion, and we already tax wealthier people at a higher rate in New York already. And we know, at least anecdotally, some of those wealthier people are moving out of New York, partially because of the high taxes. Some have talked about increasing the gasoline tax, because gasoline is cheap now. But I think the problem is, because we're in the middle of this, it's very hard to come up with an intelligent tax policy in response to the crisis. And while I think that those calls for more equity in taxation, which, by the way, makes sense, actually, from my point of view, the timing becomes the key. And if you're doing it in the middle of a crisis to plug a hole, I don't know that you're going to come up with the smartest, most intelligent approach on it. So, I'm sympathetic. I understand the concern about more fairness in how we tax people, but I'm not sure if now is the best way to come up with an intelligent response to that. But I really do think, David, if Washington doesn't come through, and if we're faced with those, the governor was talking about across the board 20% cuts for school districts, for localities, for nonprofits, I think people will say there's got to be another alternative. We can't sustain those kind of cuts, and we'll be back into the taxation question.
Yep. So, there's certainly some challenges ahead, but as for everyone who's watching out there, make sure that we follow Tom's advice and write those letters to Senator McConnell. We need the help from Washington right now, and it's time for Washington to stand up. So, just a few other things here. We're talking about how difficult it's going to be, certainly going forward. Given the budget shortfalls and the money that New York needs that it's not getting from Washington. But you have a program where people could find out if they have unclaimed funds. So maybe if you could just share a little bit about that and how folks may be able to find some money in this difficult time.
Our most popular program, Returning People's Lost Money. Everybody likes that. So unclaimed funds, it's probably not the best description of what it is, but a better way to describe it is lost money, right? So people have different ways that they can get separated from their money. And under our laws, if you have, let's say, an old bank account that there's been no activity after a certain period of time, it's declared dormant, and it falls under what's called the abandoned property law. And what many people have seen in the newspapers, those long legal notices with names of people and that the banks take out. And what they're doing is complying with the law, which says that if you have dormant accounts, you have to advertise and try to find the account holder. And if you don't, you can't hold on to that money. What you do is you turn it over to the state. And so we in the Comptroller's office are then the custodians for those unclaimed funds, as we call them, or abandoned property. And there are other kinds of financial accounts. Sometimes people have old stock accounts that, again, there hasn't been economic activity. People may have an old security deposit with a utility. People may have a vendor check, a health insurance check that was never cashed. So an old check, again, after a certain period of time, if it's not cashed, whoever issued the check has to turn it over to the state. Somebody may have left you money in a life insurance policy, and for whatever reason they couldn't find you. Again, money is turned over to the state. The most typical way that someone gets separated from their money is that they've moved and the financial institution didn't have your updated contact information. That happened to me. I got a call once from a bank. I had a little savings account that was my first bank account I opened up when I had a job in high school, and I always kept the account. The bank name changed 100 times, but I kept this little account. There wasn't much money in it, but it was more a sentimental thing. And I had moved, and I hadn't really used the account, and so I got a call, and they said, we're looking for Tom DiNapoli. I said, this is he. Well, we have this old account. We're going to turn it over to the Comptroller's office, which would have been pretty embarrassing if my money showed up in the Comptroller's office, right? And I said, oh, this is me. They found me not because they didn't have my updated address, but I moved within Great Neck, so my phone number hadn't changed. So I said, no. So what I did is I went down and I put some money in or took some money out. I forgot what to keep the account active. So I always say to people, if you have any kind of financial account, make sure there's some kind of activity. Number one. Number two, if you move, make sure that you update your contact information, your address, certainly, if not your phone number. But all that being said, with these different kinds of possible sources, we have now, David, believe it or not, we have accounts valued at about $16 billion, billion with a B.
Wow.
Workers' money. Now, David, you're going to say the network could use some of that money. How come I'm sitting on it? And the truth is the money is not sitting in a little treasure chest under my desk here in Albany. In fact, the legislature appropriates that money. What we do is keep enough in reserve for the requests that we know we'll get for reimbursement. And every time we send money out, we actually have more money coming in because there's always new accounts that become dormant. But we're returning well over $1 million a day right now. And in fact, our requests for returning this money have picked up. Like your calls have picked up, our calls have picked up on unclaimed funds because many people have been laid off or their business is closed. They're hurting. They may have heard that they had some money in this program and they never bothered to claim it. So, for those who are participating in the town hall, especially if you never heard of unclaimed funds, this is the most useful bit of information that we're imparting. Go to the Comptroller's office website, whatever your search engine is, just put in New York State Comptroller, and then click on this part of the site that says unclaimed funds. And you could search right online, put your name in, if you have a business, if you're part of a nonprofit, your church, your synagogue, your mosque. There are various ways you may be connected to an account. Put in the names of your friends and family members. You'll be very popular if you find money for them. I always tell people, put in the name of close relatives who may be deceased. You may have a parent or a grandparent who passed away. We have many of these accounts that are in the name of people who passed away. But if you can show your connection to the inheritance, you can claim that money as well. So the website is www.osc, or Office of State Comptroller, .state.ny.us. But really all you have to do is just search engine New York State Comptroller. Click on unclaimed funds. You could search online, and if there's a direct match, you'll get your check really in a matter of days, or maybe no longer than a week. When I first started as Comptroller, you had to call an 800 number or send in a snail mail request. Since we've gone online and we've made it even easier since we launched this, I think close to 90%, certainly over 85% of our returns now are done right online. So people can do that in the privacy of their home. A lot of people are home now with their computers, right? It's a good activity. Just search for unclaimed funds. If you do need, some assistance and you want to talk to somebody, to walk you through the process, our number is 1-800-221-9311, 1-800-221-9311. I guarantee some of the folks that are on this town hall, some of that $16 billion is yours. Most of the recoveries are $50 to $100. Every now and then it's a few hundred. Not unusual for it to be in the thousands. We had an estate a couple of years ago. No, it wasn't an estate. It was some stock accounts that were like $1.7 million.
Wow.
I'm not sure how someone misplaces $1.7 million. Somebody did. So there's real money there. It's not quite the lottery, but you'd be surprised how many people are connected to an account and they just don't realize it. So thank you, David, for raising that. It's a good opportunity to let people know that we want to return their money.
Sure. And thank you for, making the program accessible, right? I mean, I think that before you were controller, many people didn't know about it. And if you did know about it, it really became more of an effort and you didn't pursue it. So, on all of our social media channels, that information should be posted. If it's not posted yet, will be posted shortly about, the hyperlink and then how to find that money. And we certainly hope that, people are able to find some unclaimed funds during this hard time. So, so with that, we have a couple of minutes left. I want to see if there's anything else that that you'd like to share or add.
Well, you mentioned some of the the PPP and the issue for nonprofits. One other piece I'd just like to throw out there, we have a longstanding investment with the pension fund, and I'll mention a little more about the pension fund. But let me first say, with an organization it had been called the New York Business Development Corporation that does small business lending. They've rebranded their name recently to something called Pursuit Lending. And so we've designated $50 million of that money. It's a safe return for the pension fund, and it's backstopped by some of the federal guarantees that are related to COVID-19. But that is another source of possible loan money for small businesses. And what we like about this program is that not-for-profits could apply for this money as well, which is different than some of the other PPP programs. So you can be in touch with my office if you want more details, but the easiest way is to go to the website. It's, again, the organization is called Pursuit Lending, so spelled out pursuitlending.com.
Mm-hmm.
And you can get information about it. And, so maybe some of the folks who are listening who are small businesses and didn't qualify for some of the existing SBA programs or the PPP program, they may not be aware of Pursuit Lending, but that is another option. And let me just mention to folks who are on the town hall who may be a public worker, a local government or state government. Our pension fund, as you mentioned, Dave, I think at the outset, is one of the largest ones in the country, but it's also one of the best funded. We just put out our returns for the end of the year. Unfortunately, we value the fund on March 31st every year. So that's markets were really going haywire. So we did have a negative year, only minus 2.68%. So it's a small setback. 10 years ago when the Great Recession hit, by way of comparison, we were down 26% in 1 year. So we can handle minus 2.68. So I just want to assure those who are part of our pension system, we're still well funded. We took a little bit of a hit, but already where we stand now in August, we've made back much of what had been lost at the beginning of the crisis. So the challenge for us is the date that's key for us is March 31st of every year. So we certainly want to see this economy recover, the market stay strong, so that next March 31st we'll have another strong positive return. But we have no problem with liquidity. We're paying our pension benefits. We are still one of the best funded of the state plans. In fact, the Pew Research Center put out their ranking just about 2 weeks ago of pension funds. How well funded are they? Not how big are they? How well funded are they? How much money do we have to pay for our retirement obligations? New York State was number 2 at 98% funded. So as I said, we're not 98% funded today, but because we go into this challenging time well funded, I have full confidence that we are going to continue to provide that retirement security for our 1.1 million members. And so I don't want people to be concerned if they've heard, oh, the pension fund lost a little bit of money because of the pandemic. We're going to get through this. It's going to be fine.
Mm-hmm. And, I know we're going to get through it because, there's been no one better to protect that pension fund than you. And, and even in these, most challenging times, a 2% loss, particularly during that time at the end of March, like when the markets were going absolutely crazy, is quite impressive, actually, Tom. So, and going forward, the only way to go is up. I mean, it may take a little bit longer to get there, but there has been no better protector of our pension fund. I shouldn't say, when I say ours, meaning I'm not in it, but of New York State's pension fund than you. And so, and there's been no better protector, I think, for being a New Yorker, no matter what your background is, no matter what your race is, no matter what your sexual orientation is, no matter what your political party is, than Tom DiNapoli. Tom is I'm talking about you here in the third person, but Tom is, someone who I had said from the outset that Tom is the most liked person in politics. And it's not only about being liked, it's because Tom listens to people. Tom has a way of you have a way, Tom, of getting things done. Because you listen to both sides and are able to really bring people together for common sense solutions. So, I am, I'm in awe of everything that you do all the time. I consider myself very lucky to have you in my life as one of my best friends and longtime friends. And can't thank you enough for spending the time today with us on this town hall, really giving some very important information, and knowing that we're going to be heading in a trajectory that will be better than it is today.
We will get through it, and certainly with leadership that you provide, David, and your team, and the great work of the network, that's going to help us get through it as well. So thank you for everything that you do. Thank you, Tom. And I look forward to the day, hopefully sometime soon, that we could go support some of our local restaurants together. Yes, that's the deal. I look forward to it as well. All righty. Thank you so much. Take care and be safe. And thank you, everyone, for tuning in. And again, go to lgbtnetwork.org/virtual center so you could see the more than 30 programs that we're offering each week virtually until we're able to reopen our doors. Thank you, Tom, and look forward to seeing everyone soon. Take care. Bye.